we've got the recording on now. Okay. I just want to remind you all who we are. We are the UC Cooperative Extension's Master Gardeners of Monterey, Santa Cruz, and we do include San Benito County as well. We're a research-based organization. We really look at research-based knowledge and information on home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscape practices. So while the Cooperative Extension works, the farm advisors there work with the farms, businesses. They train us on some good horticultural knowledge, and then we reach out to home gardeners in the area and train them and get really important information out to them on how to garden sustainably. Excuse me. Next slide, Loretta. Okay, and this is where I turn it over to Loretta. She is such a great master gardener. I'm so glad she's doing this class today. You're really going to enjoy it. Take it away, Loretta.
Thank you, Trink. Hi, everyone. I'm Loretta. I've been a master gardener since 2014. I'm retired from was a programmer for many years, and just realized I really loved horticulture a lot more than sitting on a computer. So that's why I grow a lot of edibles, mostly citrus and avocado, stone fruits, and pigs. I have a heritage pig farm where I'm trying to preserve the breed. Welcome, and I just really like solving your garden problems. I have been working since about the last 3 years at the garden company on Mission Street in Santa Cruz, and I've really got a chance to learn a lot about customers' issues with citrus and how we could help them out. And I also worked for a while before COVID hit for Four Winds Growers, who are our local citrus propagators here in Watsonville. So anyway, so we'll get started then. So here's what I'm going to cover today. I have various tables of varieties of citrus that will grow well in our cool, foggy summer climate. And I'm speaking mostly about the center of the Monterey Bay. If you're a little more inland in San Benito County or Hollister area, you're going to be able to maybe get a little sweeter fruit than we can those of us that are close to the cool coast, because you have more heat out there. So your flavors profile may be a little different than ours. But that's great. That's okay. You'll also be a little colder. So we're also going to cover how to care for citrus trees, how to select them, plant them, watering and fertilizing, when to pick the fruit, which can be tricky here, and pests and diseases, and also where to get the help. So let's start off with some of the basics here. This little diagram just shows the citrus tree. Most of them that you'll buy in any nursery or garden center will be composed of two pieces. There's a rootstock, and there is the fruiting part, the good fruit that's grafted onto that rootstock. And you'll see a little graft scar if you look closely, or you'll see a little indentation where it goes from thick to thin, or some indication of where the fruiting scion was grafted to the rootstock. The fruiting scions are chosen for their flavor, abundance of fruit, ripening time, disease resistance, etc. And they are all genetic clones of the mother plant from which they're cut. And the rootstocks, the bottom part, they're chosen for disease resistance, soil adaptability, vigor, and somewhat to control tree size. Some rootstocks will give you a bigger standard tree, and some will give you a semi-dwarfing tree. And those rootstocks are done either by cutting, so they're cloned themselves, or seed if they come true from seed. So citrus trees and plants in general, the origins are of Southeast Asia, and it's a lot warmer and less frost there. So there's oodles and oodles of citrus there, and they get sweet and they're good. And so if you compare that to our commercial citrus growing regions in the US, it's where we're warmer and least frost, right? So you have Southern and Central California and Florida are two of our big citrus growing regions, although you'll see some, I think, in maybe Georgia area and some of the coastal Texas, etc. So we can be successful here with many varieties of citrus. And so we want to make sure we choose our varieties carefully so that we can get the most for the space we're allocating to them. So site selection, when you look in your yard, you want to pick the place in your yard that's the warmest, sunniest spot. When a plant is described as growing in full sun, that usually means 6 hours of solid direct light. If you have a southern exposure, southwestern exposure, that's going to be warmer there. That's the place to choose for your citrus tree. On average, most of them can get 10 to 15 feet tall. So plan carefully for that final height. They're evergreen, so they're going to be a big block, and that may be a good thing or not. So you can also keep them smaller with pruning. So don't think that you're stuck with getting a 15-foot tree when you may not want something that large, because you can prune. And depending on the variety, some just grow larger or smaller than others. Most of the rootstock that you'll find that trees are grafted to in any commercial place you buy a citrus tree is the semi-dwarfing, what they call a trifoliate rootstock. There's a few exceptions to that. Lemons in general are incompatible, so they in general get bigger. Your store lemons, like your Eurekas and stuff. The Meyer is an exception. That Meyer lemon that we tend to love here in our coastal area is a naturally smaller growing hybrid. So there was a time when there were dwarfier varieties out there, not maybe 10 plus years ago, and some of them are still out there. There's a flying dragon rootstock that's smaller, but they're not real small anyway. And I think research has found that there's been issues with yield and longevity on those dwarfier rootstocks, but they're going to keep trying, because the whole tendency with our smaller home lots is to bring dwarf fruiting trees. So I don't think we've seen the last of smaller citrus, but in general, they want to be a fairly large tree. And they can grow in a really wide range of soils. Well draining is ideal, but I grew up in Riverside, and running through the orange groves, it was hard packed clay in between those trees, and they thrived there. So they will adapt. You just want to make sure it does drain. Something that just holds water or is in a low spot that pools water, that isn't going to work. But you can, improve your soil, and you can improve your planting hole and to plant the citrus that you want in general here. So there's several tables here that you may want to go through on your own. And I kind of divided them up I grouped them by the variety. So like there's a lemon table. And if I'm going to mention any of them, I'll just mention a few of the popular ones you may see in local nurseries. So that first lemon, Eureka, that's your standard grocery store lemon, a true lemon. And they tend to be a big tree. And most of the citrus will bloom in spring, but with the lemons, Eureka and the Meyer, you'll get all these off blooms that come out where the majority comes out in spring. You'll see some blooms throughout the year. So if you have a Eureka or a Meyer lemon, you're probably going to have year-round lemons. You won't know what to do with them all, because even if you get rid of your main crop, you still have the off bloom crop. So you'll be able to go and pick a lemon whenever you want with those two trees. If that's your desire. So there's lots of other lemons, but in general, they're all pretty similar, and they do well here because lemons, being that they're tart, they don't need heat to sweeten. For limes, the standard lime that does well for us is that first one, the bears. They also call it Tahitian lime or Persian lime. And it tends to bear heavily. It drops kind of all its fruit at once, but it's still a few will hang on there for whenever you want a lime, and you can pick them green. And note that not too many people realize that limes, when they're ripe, they turn yellow. That's all limes do that. So don't think you got a lemon or something because your limes turn yellow. It is a lime. Some of the limes Ours is a little more hardy. You see that it can take 30 degrees, but some of the other limes, if you want what I'm calling the more exotic or the heat lovers, you've got to protect them, especially if they're a young tree when we're going to get frost. So the Thai limes, the Mexican key limes, those are all tender. So you want to give them your sunniest spot, maybe a spot against your warm stucco wall or something to keep them warmer. Mandarins, they do really well here in general. I think mandarins taste better as mandarins than even the sweet oranges do for our area, because they tend to be smaller, and for whatever reason, the smaller fruit, the smaller nature of the fruits, they will get better flavored and get sweetness to them. So like I say, I'd rather have mandarin oranges than my navel oranges, although I love navels, but the mandarins just taste better. So I eat my navels too, but just saying, and they tend to be smaller trees than the bigger sweet oranges as well, in general. Smaller leaves, a little more ornamental. So I think I have 2 pages of these because there's a lot of them out there. Most of these are available from Four Winds growers, or you can find them in the local nurseries. This whole two plus years of COVID, though, has put a really big damper on varietal availability. I see a lot of the basics in the nurseries, but a lot of the different ones, the fancier ones, the newer ones, they just haven't been being propagated all that much during COVID. So hopefully as we get out of it, you'll see the varieties come back. Just another page of mandarins. And the other thing about mandarins is you could get some early, an early fruiter like the Satsuma. That's one of the earliest ones. It's that wrinkled skin and the fruit shakes in the skin, basically. That's a Satsuma. Those are some of the early ones to ripen. And then you can go as late as that Encore. So that ripens in the following summer. So you can have a long season of fruit with a few select mandarin oranges. So the sweet oranges, that's what the label I put on your typical navels, your peeling, eating oranges. The navels have that, they're recognized by that little belly button at the bottom of the fruit. That's why they call it a navel. And they're the ones that tend to ripen early for the sweet oranges. They're the winter oranges you see in the stores are usually navels. They come in maybe a little before winter and they last a few months, and then the summer oranges come in, and those are the ones that tend to be the juice oranges or the Valencia type oranges. So as far as navels go, I kind of put some little notes on the ones I think taste better. They all grow into a fine tree here because you can see their frost hardiness is even better than some of the lemons and limes. So they can take a little more cold, but they really love heat to get sweet. And that being said, we're going to have hotter summers some years than others. So some years you're going to have a great navel and some years kind of insipid. That's what I see and with my mature trees. The other thing that affects the flavor of your fruit as you're growing your citrus, give it a few years for it to develop its mature flavor. That's another thing. A young tree, a fruit off a real young tree may not taste that great, and give it time because it's still young. So you have your navels that are this basic seedless sweet oranges, and then you have the Valencias that have a few seeds. That Midnight Valencia, it's a later, the Valencias are the summer oranges. Midnight's a small tree. I'm still trying to get mine to grow. It's kind of a little bit in shock, but it seems to be a sweet fruit for us, maybe because it does get the benefit of all that summer heat to get sweet. But they do have a few seeds. Midnight is a little more seedless than the rest. There's one I wanted to note here, this Trevita. I've seen it in a lot of books and stuff described as the sweet orange to get if you're in the cool coastal foggy areas. And all I can say about that is I think that's really overrated. I've talked to people who agree with me because I have one. It doesn't taste any better to me than the navel oranges. So that's just something I've seen and others have observed. I think it's kind of, it's been pushed and touted as the sweet orange for the cool foggy areas, and it's a good orange. It's just good. And like I say, when we get that better, hotter summer and enough chill in the winter, it can be really good, but still never as good as the navels. The miscellaneous varieties that will do well here too, if you like the little more exotic, the Calamansi, you see that used a lot in the Philippines. They call it Calamansi, and they use the juice on fish like as if it were a lime. It's tasty and tart, and they also make like an aid, like an orangeade or lemonade out of it. For those of you who are kind of in a cooler area, maybe more closer to the mountains, and you want that flavor of a lime, especially that key lime flavor, this Eustace lime quat, it's a cross between a key lime and a kumquat. Kumquats have a lot more cold tolerance than those really tender Mexican key limes. So this cross is more hardy, and it looks like a little kumquat, but the flavor tastes a lot like a key lime. So that's a cool little tree to have in a pot, or for a little squeeze of lime juice on things when you need it. This Endio Mandarin is new. I saw it at the nursery. It had fruit on it. It hung there for a while. Then those of us who were, I saw the fruit dwindling on the tree. And so I got one before it could all get eaten up. And I'm not a kumquat person, but it was a really good flavor. It was like a big kumquat, and you just eat the whole thing, peel and fruit. You just go for it. And don't be afraid of eating the peel kumquat when it's ripe. But this Endio Mandarin quat was really tasty. And then COVID hit and I didn't see any more come into the store. So hopefully we'll get more of those in, but that was really cool. The other thing to note, I put what I'm calling a grapefruit at the bottom here, that Oro Blanco. If you want good grapefruit flavored juice, they grow really well here. It's a beautiful tree. The blossoms are huge. And because they're huge, it's just beautifully fragrant. All the citrus blossoms are, but it's just a pretty tree, glossy. And you see these big yellow orbs of fruit hanging on it. And when they're ripe, it's very sweet, but just know that it may be a big fruit like this, look like a grapefruit, but inside the fruit is like this, and the peel is really thick. And I think that's just due to our climate, our weather, how it grows here. So you're not going to cut it in half and eat it with a spoon like you do some of those desert grown grapefruits, which is the climate most grapefruits prefer. But you will get lovely juice out of it. And I just cut it and eat like that. In one bite, I get all the middle out. And it's a thick skin, but it's sweet. It's a sweet grapefruit for our area. So if you love that flavor, you'll like the Oro Blancos. Okay, so choosing a tree, you want to make sure, you'll see trees from this small, tiny little new yearling grafted trees. And you'll see some that are a little more established, have a year or two of growth on them in the stores. So just look for one that looks healthy, green. Poke your finger around in there and feel if it feels like there's a dense root mass. Sometimes when they get root bound in the nurseries, it's going to take some special care during planting and just raising it up to get it out of that root bound mode. It may shock a little bit more. So avoid those trees if you can, but they still will grow for you. You just have to have a little more care with them. But get the best trees you can find. A nice symmetrical little branching pattern, but you can also prune. Sometimes these new young trees, they have one branch that just hangs off out of whack with the rest, and you can prune it and rein it in. Let's go on to the next here. So planting it in the ground. You read a lot of different things about planting trees, and they say dig twice as big as the hole and deep. But the thing about citrus and lots of other trees in general is you don't want to dig deeper. Your hole shouldn't be deeper than the pot your citrus tree was in. And the main reason for that is when you dig a deep hole, and even when you fill it to plant your tree so that it's soil level, that it was in the pot is with the soil level of your ground where you're planting it. It will sink. You water it, and when there's loose, fluffy dirt underneath it, it sinks, and the crown of the tree will get covered up really quickly when it sinks like that, and that isn't good for the tree. So your best bet is to dig it a little wider, but don't dig it deeper. And it's even okay if it's raised a little. If you see a few roots on the top of your citrus tree in its pot, that's okay. You don't feel you have to cover that up. You can cover it up a little bit, but just avoid covering the crown, this little collar of the tree where the trunk goes into the dirt, because it's important for that to stay above the ground. So I just noted, select your sunny site again. For those of you that get that coastal beach wind, it'll keep blowing the leaves off your citrus. It's got to be sheltered from the sea wind. So maybe a backyard or side yard that still gets the sun, that's sheltered from that wind, and you can get the tree to grow. But we've had a lot of customers come in the shop that their lemon tree or whatever just isn't, it grows new leaves and then they fall off. Well, it's that salty air that just blows them and they fall. So, and then you just want to be gentle with the pot. So I find it easier to tilt your pot sideways when you have your hole dug. Oh, put a gopher basket in there, because gophers like citrus and they seem to be more rampant than usual this year. Just couldn't say why, but that's customers coming into the shop are talking about gophers getting things they never went for before. Same thing with deer. The mammal population are hungry and they're coming in and for new eats. Anyway, so get that gopher basket if you need it. Gently slide it, the root ball out, set it in and measure it. If it looks like it's a little too deep, then go ahead, lift it, stick it back in the pot, put a little more dirt at the bottom, pat it down a little bit and put the tree back in. It's okay, you're working with it. And then what I noted here on this little diagram is that, when you buy the tree, all its roots are right here in that pot shape, right? So make a berm of dirt, just like if you were little and made ponds and lakes when you were playing in the mud, you pinched the dirt and made a moat, or you made a berm. So you're going to do that around your tree, make a soil berm so that it holds water when you fill it. And that it channels the water right down into that root ball that needs it. If you put it on drip right when you get it, and the drip lines are out here, the roots aren't there. So you can get a tree drying out on a drip that's newly planted because its massive roots is all in here and it's not getting water. So you can still put it on a drip, but put one drip like right there in the middle, and then maybe a couple of drips on the outer edges for the roots that will move out in that direction. Or you can always adjust your drippers later, but that's the most important when you first plant it, to get the water in the root ball. So the other thing that's important to note is you're going to use mostly your existing soil. Don't put a whole lot of amendment when you're filling that hole that you dug. This comes from a lot of expert sources now, because I remember years ago they'd say, oh, put in all these amendments and make this big hole filled with amendments. And that's not the greatest for the tree, what researchers have found. So stick with your native dirt. If it's heavy and clayish, break it up. You can add some gypsum in there to help break up that clay. Break it up, and you can add some amendment. Just don't put a whole lot, because you want the tree the roots to go out into that native soil. You don't want it to feel so comfy in its new hole with all that composted material you put in there that the roots will just circle in there and they'll kind of choke itself out. So you want it to go out into the native soil. It's best, take that organic amendment, that soil builder, whatever, and you can use that as a mulch over the top, like they did in this picture here. That's where I think the organic amendments are best used, because that's where they happen. That's where they fall in nature. They fall to the surface. And so that will conserve water, and it will break down and give nutrients to the tree. So just watch that that little crown doesn't get buried. But usually mulches are light, and even if you use a bark, it doesn't hurt the crown because it's airy. And you want to keep watering with this basic method, maybe for about a year if you can, unless, like I described before, unless you have a good drip system where you have some water coming to the center and around. But if you just had this and then later substituted a drip, that'd be great, because that gives your plant, it makes it easy to water because you're just filling up your basin maybe a couple times to get the water down into that root area. And then you can switch to your drip and get rid of that basin so it looks more flat in your yard. So now we get to a tree grown citrus. And just the thing to note, anything you grow in, pot grown citrus, anything you grow in a pot, tree, perennial, annual, it needs more water, needs more nutrients, fertilizers. I want to make a special note here just to make sure there's some great, beautiful pots out there, but if they have any sort of a bulb shape or an urn shape, you're going to have trouble when it comes time to transplant, because you can't, it's hard. You're going to have to cut off a lot of root to get that big ball through a little opening at the top. So I suggested straight-sided pots, and they can still taper like your typical clay pot tapers in a V. Just think, you want to be able to pull it out when it comes time to upsize the pot without having to cut a lot of root off and set the tree back. You want to use a real gritty, as in sandy, a well-draining soil mix. And I suggested a cactus soil or a 50-50 blend of a cactus mix with a high-quality bagged soil. That grittiness, it adds air and drainage, and I'd say most things in pots would prefer to having a lot of grit in their blend. I have a little key lime, and it's in 100% cactus mix. And I water a little more often, but it's thriving. It's set fruit, and it's right away. It didn't go into any shock, no root rot. So at first I thought, oh, this seems so dry, because I stick my finger in there and I feel sand and I feel pumice and perlite, but it loves it, but you will need to fertilize a little more often. So again, you're just going to be gentle with your pot, sliding it out horizontally, and just test it in the new pot, because you want the existing soil level of where it's in the pot to be about an inch or two below the edge of the top edge of your pot, so that you have room to fill up with water. So just don't get it too high to where there's no room to fill it up with water, or you're going to be, watering with little trickles and stuff. It's too much dirt. So, and then you don't want it too far down. So just give it an inch or two up at the top, and allow for some settling, and you should be fine. You may want to give a loose stake. When you buy the trees in the nursery, they tend to come with a really tightly tied stake. And that's necessary when it's a new little yearling and it's this little tender shoot. It has to be tightly staked or it will break and get damaged. But loosen that up, because what'll happen is if you keep it staked tightly like that, and then you transplant or something, you want to take the stake away, the trunk will just flop over. And this is true for just about any other type of tree. If the trunk isn't exercised a little bit, it won't gain the strength that it needs to hold itself up. So just loosen the stake a little bit, that allows just a little movement. And that will really help the trunk get stronger. When you plant, you can add a small amount of fertilizer into the mix of the soil, but you can also just, if it's a new potting mix, a lot of them tend to have some nutrient in them already. These days, just about all of them have some organic nutrient. So you can just stay with that, plant it, and then get onto a regular fertilizer routine, following the instructions on the back of your preferred fertilizer. I suggest a citrus blend, a fertilizer for citrus. That's not necessary, but it has the nutrients that citrus need in general, besides your typical macronutrients. It'll have things like iron and calcium and a little sulfur for some acidity, because citrus tend to like a little bit on the acid side. You're going to need to think about repotting. Now, one thing I noted on here, and this is something I learned from Four Winds growers and at the nursery as well, is that you don't want to take an itty bitty little tree and stick it in a big pot, thinking you're giving it all this room and you're going to put it in that final barrel that it's going to be in. What can happen is that tree's root mass is tiny. Maybe it was in a little sleeve or in a little gallon-sized pot. And you put all this new potting soil around it that holds a lot more moisture than what that existing little root ball held. And that's where the tendency to get root rot can play in, because you're watering and that outer new soil stays a lot wetter than the mass in the middle. And so those roots that are on the edge of the root ball that want to grow out there, they're exposed to more moisture. So you just have to be careful. Just remember that even if you go a little bigger than 2 inches at a time when you're transplanting, just be careful with your watering and maybe get a little extra more of a well-draining blend so you don't have that issue come up with the root rot. But that's I learned, like I say, that came from Four Winds growers, and then also at the nursery in general with the houseplant experts there and stuff. That's a good rule of thumb for houseplants as well. Just go up 2 inches at a time when you upsize a pot. So in general, a citrus tree in the soil, I see some data that says fertilize it 3 or 4 times a year in the soil. I haven't found it too necessary. I think a person can get a great amount of yield without that many applications. But what's really vital is you get that spring application in, and if you get a second one, in the later summer, that will really help your tree stay greener going through the winter. So I said here it needs at least 1, preferably 2 to 3 applications of high nitrogen fertilizer from March through August. And you don't generally want to go past August with your fertilizing. And if you're doing a liquid, then that's going to be, you're going to need to apply more often. They're quicker acting, but they're also quicker draining through the soil. The granular fertilizers, whether they're organic or non, they tend to take a little longer time to break down, so they're present longer before they're eaten up or before they're flushed out. So follow the directions on the back of the fertilizer you chose, because it will usually give you instructions for potted plants, for in-ground, and the quantities that you should use based on the size of the plant or tree. So there's no general formula I can give you. It's all based on what you choose to fertilize with. For watering, again, it's hard. I can't give you a formula that says, oh, water the new tree 3 times a week and then taper off. It all depends on your site, your soil, your temperatures where you planted it, and the size of the tree. So you got to use this. This is number 1. You got to use your finger or a moisture meter to test and see when you need to water. And then that'll help you establish the frequency that you water your trees and give you a routine. So you just need to stick your finger in a couple inches into the soil, close to your tree, and then a little, close to the trunk, and then a little further out if you're just in the roots. And when that top inch or 2 is dry, that means you should water. And you want to water it thoroughly. If it's a pot, so this is in particular watering your potted tree, this slide. So if it's a pot, you must water until the water drains out the bottom. And that tells you got the whole root zone. Some folks don't want a lot of mess or a lot of drips coming out the bottom of their pot, and they just tend to water on the top. And you're going to water starve your tree because the roots are going all the way down. So water thoroughly till it drains out the bottom. And make sure you have good drainage, good holes in the pot so that it does drain out. A thing to note is if you have darker pots, if you're using dark plastic or dark porcelain, they're going to need more frequent watering. Those pots may get pretty hot. So consider that when you're thinking about the site where you're going to plant your tree, because I did tomatoes one year in those big black plastic ones, and they were doing great till summer peaked, and they were cooking. I couldn't, watering them twice a day, were still wilting. And it was just because they were steaming hot. So I put foil on the southwestern side of these plastic pots, and problem averted. Black absorbs heat. So just remember that. They're attractive pots, but they can make for more watering. And if your tree is newly planted in ground, you're going to need to water more often, about 2 or 3 times a week. And that's approximate. Again, it depends on your soil and your site. So use your finger to help you judge whether you need to water that often. But it seems like 2 to 3 times a week in general for our area for a newly planted tree. And you're filling up that your little lake a couple times so that the water soaks down and wets your whole root ball. And then you can back off as the tree grows or the season cools. We get into fall or the tree is growing, you can change your watering system and lessen that down. My mature citrus trees in the peak of summer or peak of heat, their most frequent watering frequency is once every 2 weeks. And I have them on a drip that has the, it's that Netafilm. The drips are every foot on a tubular, and I just make circles around the tree. And as it grows, I just open up the circle. It has a dead end. It's one long strand that I wrap around in a spiral for a little tree. So it's a quick water when they're little. And then that allows for expansion as the tree grows. And I use that same drip system on mine, but that's probably another class. So whatever works best for your yard, your watering system. Pruning. In general, citrus doesn't need a lot of pruning unless you're really working hard to keep it small, because it's in a yard in a small area. The trees I prune that I've actually taken a chainsaw to are the lemons. The Eureka lemon, it gets huge and I can't reach them. And so I told my husband, just chainsaw it in half, and it worked just fine. It lowered the whole canopy of the tree. I could reach the fruit better, and it didn't phase it at all. In fact, it stimulated to shoot out a lot of growth suckers that I had to do a lot more pruning with. But prune to keep to the size that you desire, that you need for your yard. You won't, and you will do even less in a pot. Mostly it's, sometimes you'll get a wayward branch that maybe throws off the symmetry, and you can prune it. Or if you're really trying to keep a potted citrus tree small, maybe extra small, when you repot it, you're going to be pruning some of the roots off, and you balance up by pruning off a lot of the top, and it'll set you back a year or 2 in fruit, but it'll keep your tree small if that's what you need to do. Some people who transplant, you're going to cut a lot back because you've cut a lot of root off, but they recover if you're careful with them and watch their watering and stuff, they recover. One thing to note, that the branches on a citrus, they'll grow all the way down to the ground, and you want to prune those up and off the ground, because personal experience, I didn't do that, and I didn't see that the ground squirrels were working on girdling the bark around a really nice mandarin orange. So that you could see the little bit of the trunk, at least prune those lower branches off, so the gophers can't hide while they build a mound to work, make a little tower to come up and eat another branch off. It just helps. And then some things, especially in pots, it looks nice if you have a bit more of a trunk showing. You see citrus trees in Arizona and stuff, and they whitewash them because they have that. They do that in Italy too, because the trunk has been pruned to show off the trunk and the branches, but that leaves the trunk vulnerable to sunburn. So you may want to whitewash. If you have a lot of trunk showing, you can whitewash the trunk to protect it. Your young trees, especially, protect them from frost. You've made this investment. You've planned it out, you've planted it and you're watering and caring for it, and then winter comes. And at least for those first couple years, you can get some of this Rime, it's called, or Agribon, generic name, they just call it frost cloth. And you can even use a sheet. It'll give you like a degree or two of difference in the temperature, and that might be all you need to keep your tree healthy. So protect them from the frost, watch your weather. I've never gone this far, but for some really frost sensitive trees, some folks use the old fashioned Christmas lights that they still sell, and they call them C9s. Those are the ones that have the little candelabra based bulb. It's a big bulb and they generate heat. So you can have a Christmas citrus tree and protect it from frost at the same time. So now we're getting into some common pests. There's a lot of things that citrus can get, but I put the ones that are most common that we see that are unsightly or can be detrimental to your tree. So aphids. Aphids come in all colors, green, black, brown, and they can really do damage. What they do is they suck the juices out of the tender new growth on the tips of your trees, and because those juices have sugars in them, carbohydrates. And so you'll get leaves falling off and it just looks unsightly. So there's some simple treatments. Some people just hose off with strong jets of water. Sometimes those jets of water are so strong that it also blows the new leaves off too. So other things you can do is there's simple soap sprays. You don't want anything too strong, a strong pesticide. Dish soap and water sprays. Horticultural oil, you can get these at nurseries or garden centers. It's just a light oil that has an emulsifier in it, mixes with water. And when it's sprayed on, and it's useful for a lot of things, when it's sprayed on your tree, it smothers the aphids and the young other insects as well, nymphs and such. You can get pesticides that have pyrethrin or neem that are still classified as organic. But for aphids, you might keep something like that around for other pests as well. But for aphids, usually the soap and water will do it. And the biggest thing here that you'll see on this is treat for ants, if present. The big thing about a lot of these pests that will collect on your citrus trees is that the ants are at the root of them all. The ants help farm these bugs. The ants will protect the aphids, move them around because they benefit. So when the aphids or the scale, whatever it is, sucks the juices out of your plants, it exudes in some way. I don't know if it's like pees out or barfs out, but it exudes sugary pee. And then you get, the ants love that. They'll feed on that, and they also feed on the black sooty mold that grows on the sugary pea from the aphids or the scale. That's a big combination. You'll see a lot on citrus. You'll see the scale or the aphids, and you'll see black mold, and you'll see ants. So put some ant baits underneath the tree. You can paint it with some goopy stuff. I forget the name of it. It's like a pine tar. If you like that, if you prefer that, you can get the boric acid traps that they'll eat and take to the nests. And then there's also some ant granules that have an attractant like a sugar. And then there's a pesticide, a natural pesticide called a spinosad in it. And those will kill your ants too. But control the ants and then start working on the cosmetic washing off the aphids and try to see if you can get them under control that way. So here's a picture of this brown, this cottony scale. Some of it's white, some of it's brown. It'll look like a little brown barnacle. And they do the same thing as the aphids. They suck the fluids, but these now are on the stems. They aren't just on the tender leaves, they're on the stems of your citrus. And so you can get whole stem death, limb death, twig death, if you get enough of these clustered on your branches. So again, control the ants, and you can use the soap sprays, the horticultural oils. Now you might want to crack out the pyrethrin or neem to get a little extra potency. The one thing to note, And this is true for any time you get a tenacious scale, like the brown one I described that kind of looks like a little barnacle, is that you can kill it with these things, but you won't know because it's still stuck to the tree. And I've seen customers say over and over that they have to keep applying because they're not dying. Well, just use your fingernail when they're fresh, when they're alive, so you know that they're juicy when you scrape them off. And note that, and then after you spray, give it a few days, and then scrape it off with your fingernail. And if it's kind of dried out, you killed it. It's just stuck there. So you don't have to overdose with the pesticide thinking that the scale is still there. You might have to do a little scrubbing to get the barnacle off, so that you can tell that it's not a new one. So here's some common pests I see coming to the nursery. This first one, it bothers everybody. They see it because it looks a little freaky. You see these little tunnels in the leaves. And it's a leaf miner, and it burrows in between the top and bottom surfaces of the leaf. So once it's burrowing, you can't kill it. It's protected because it's in the intertissue of the leaf. So, and it usually doesn't do a whole lot of damage to the few leaves. So the best treatment is just pluck them off and dispose of them. Don't worry about them so much. I've never seen them actually devastate a tree. They're just kind of, a few leaves will look kind of ugly, and it worries people that it's going to attack the whole tree. This sooty mold I talked about, you usually see it in conjunction with aphids or scale. And again, that's because it's growing with all that other sweet stuff that the ants are farming with the aphids and the scale. So it's unsightly. You can scrub it off by hand and then treat with something for fun that'll kill fungus, which neem will if you go organic, and you can go a fungicide, because sooty mold is a fungus. But scrub all you can off first, so that when you treat, you know if you're successful, because it doesn't just come off and turn normal when you treat it. It still stays there looking dark and ugly. And then the last one with the ants, exclamation, right? Because they were the root of most of these problems. So treat for ants. Nutrient deficiencies. Really common. A citrus tree in a pot, even in the nurseries, in your ground, you get the yellowing leaves. The older leaves are turning yellow. The new ones are trying to grow, and they're a little darker green. And that's a sign of nitrogen. That's sucking the nitrogen out of the older leaves. They're turning yellow, falling off, and it's trying to give what it can to the new leaves. So you need to feed your tree. Some people get really incremental, and they only have nitrogen fertilizers, and they have phosphorus and potassium. They have all minerals and stuff. I suggest, if you're new at it, to just get either a general purpose garden fertilizer or one specifically for citrus. Because again, it'll be a little higher nitrogen, and it has the iron, calcium, and the other micronutrients that citrus would need. So just follow the instructions on the package, but that's typically nitrogen, one of the main macronutrients that a citrus needs. Once you start seeing some veining, where it's a green vein on a lighter background, that's iron. If he's a little anemic, you could give it a little bit of if you happen to have iron for other reasons, Dr. Iron or ironite or something, you give a little bit of that. Or again, it's all in the citrus tree fertilizer too. One thing to note, okay, a lot of these deficiencies will show up in the winter when it's cold. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is that the citrus, being a heavy feeder, when the soil's cold, the organisms that help the roots of the citrus uptake and use the nutrient that's in the soil, they're not working so good. They're kind of dormant. It's too cold for them to do their job. So that's one reason for citrus to turn yellow in the winter. And the other, even bigger reason, is that most of the rootstocks that the citrus is grafted to, especially this trifoliate, the semi-dwarfing, they go dormant. in the winter. If you just grew one, you can see them, they lose most of their leaves, not all of them, but it's kind of odd to see it happen. But then you realize they are a semi-dormant rootstock. So don't be alarmed, because the rootstock is taking a break as well and may not be passing all the nutrient it can to the rest of the tree. Okay. So one, if you're going to want to cure any of these deficiencies, wait until the warm spring weather. The tree usually can hold out that long. If you can, check your soil pH. I had mentioned before that citrus likes the soil a little acidic. Neutral is 7 on a pH scale. A little acidic would be lower than that, so like a 6 for citrus. But because what can happen is, even in the warm months, you've applied your fertilizer, it's summer, and your citrus still looks peaky. It looks anemic or veiny or chlorotic. One thing that can happen, especially in a pot, is that you can get a lockup, a pH lockup, because our water tends to be a little alkaline here. If it's in the ground, our soil tends to be a little alkaline. And so if the soil is too alkaline, it locks up the iron. The tree can't utilize it because of the pH. And if that's the case, if you check that pH and it's greater than 7, then you can just get a soil acidifier. Though this are found in your garden center. The organic ones, it's just sulfur. The non-organics are aluminum sulfate. You might see a picture of a blue hydrangea on the bag. That's an indicator that it's a soil acidifier. And just treat according to the package, and that may be enough to lower the pH enough to where the iron that's there in the soil will start working. But that's a good thing to check first, especially if you've already fertilized and you waited a month and you didn't see any change. So these are just other pictures. Some other little rarer things that you can see is maybe a zinc deficiency. I've mostly seen iron and nitrogen. Oh, I've seen this one sometimes too, magnesium. That's kind of obvious. You get this triangular look. You can have chelated minerals that you use in your garden that would have magnesium in it, or you can also get magnesium if you happen to have a little Epsom salt. Just don't overdo it. People tend to overdo the Epsom salt treatment. You just need a tablespoon and a half gallon of water and just enough to get that weird veining pattern healed up. And here's another weird one you can see. It kind of looks like it's iron, but this is manganese, which is different than magnesium. I always confuse them. But you can find, one thing I keep around the garden is you can find chelated minerals that are just micronutrients in a liquid form. And they tend to have all these manganese, magnesium, iron. And it's a good thing to have when maybe nothing else is wrong with your plant, but it's got some weird veining going on. You can give it a little shot of micronutrient. One thing you need to learn about if you're going to plant some citrus trees or have them is this awful disease that's here. It's called citrus greening disease. The Chinese name for it is Wanglongbing. It will also be abbreviated to HLB. It came from Asia several years ago. It's hit Florida. It's made a devastating impact on their citrus industry. It is in most of the counties in California. The citrus growing regions of California have it. We're not the ideal citrus climate. For a while, Monterey County had avoided it. I'm not sure now, though. It may be present now. And what it is it's carried by an insect, a flying insect called the Asian citrus psyllid. And this psyllid just goes from tree to tree and it sucks juices out, kind of like, sucks blood or something. And so that's how it passes the disease. It passes the juice from an infected tree to a healthy tree. And it doesn't show up right away. It can take 3 years after infection to really show this really mottled pattern on the leaf. So it takes a while to show, but once your tree shows it, you'll start getting deformed fruits, inedible fruits, and the tree just declines and it dies. And there's no known cure. I've read some really promising articles coming out of the University of California for different treatments that they're doing, and also, of course, looking into resistant rootstocks and stuff. But there's some promising data come out. So right now, because of this disease, all the citrus trees you buy, if you've wondered why they've gone up so much in the last 4 or 5 years, why they've gotten so expensive, all those baby trees have to be grown in a greenhouse. And so do the mother trees, where they take the parent budwood, because they have to be protected from this fly. So they're grown in greenhouses. If you've ever, I took a tour of the one here local in Watsonville at Four Winds, and you open the door and you get this rush of wind come out. So there's this pressure blowing from fans inside. So whenever the door is open, you don't want to let any flies blow in. So this big rush of air comes out. And their mother trees have to be tested every 2 or 3 years for the disease. So this has really put a damper, for those who know about it, to backyard Scion wood exchanges. So you could go and say, oh, I'd love to have that mandarin tree, and for people learning how to graft, and you could graft it onto your orange tree or something and get another fruit growing on it. But that's illegal right now. You don't do any backyard trading of fruit tree branches, either for growing them from cutting or to graft onto your trees, because they could be infected and you just don't see the signs yet. So you can, that doesn't mean you can't graft. You can graft onto your existing trees, but you have to get the certified clean budwood from the Citrus Clonal Protection Program, the CCPP. It's run by the University of California, and they have all these mother trees protected, and they're tested, and you can order budwood. It's not that expensive. I think they just went up. It's about $5 a bud, but they have lists and lists of citrus fruit that you can order budwood from. And that's the way to go if you want to create your own tree, or make your citrus tree a citrus cocktail tree. Just be very careful with it and look for signs. If you do see signs, you probably want to try to call, I should find a number for that, the USDA or the Department of Agriculture to note, so it can be tested, because they always want to know. They have the little fly traps for the psyllids, but they want to know where the disease is progressing. Okay, here's another problem you can have with your tree, and we see it a lot. We see it on a lot of these Facebook citrus tree sites. And what happens is the rootstock, this was, remember that diagram I showed where the root was at one variety, grown for its strength and hardiness and nematode resistance, and then they graft the fruiting tree on top. Well, that rootstock can still be really vigorous, and sometimes it throws out suckers below the little graft scar, and you'll think your tree is growing vigorously and you're doing so great because you just planted it and it's got all this new growth and it grows huge, and then you don't get any fruit, or what you get is this weird deformed bitter lemon or something like that, and you say, what's wrong with my tree? And you go in and you think, oh, it needs food, it needs minerals to get sweet. That's the biggest thing I see. My oranges aren't sweet and they're kind of yellowy and they're bitter, and it's like, take a picture and bring in a picture, because what has usually happened is the rootstock of the tree has overtaken the fruiting top. And it's so vigorous that you may have a little piece of the fruiting top still there, but this thing is taken over. And so you might see the huge tree with bitter fruit. It's kind of ugly, or you think a mistake was made on the tree label, or you'll see a long thorny sucker. Before you cut that sucker off, trace it to its origin. Trace that big long branch and look to see, is it coming from below the graft scar? And if it is, cut it off. The best thing to do is pinch them off the tree when they're little. You can see, because they will grow under the graft scar. Just pinch them off, and you won't have the big issue of it overtaking. a lot of times this happens, people just move into a new house and the owner told them it's a lemon tree. And then they get these awful things that they can't eat or no lemons at all. And that's usually what has happened. It's the rootstock has taken it over. Okay, questions? I can breathe. Did I talk too fast?
You were great, Loretta.
Loretta, you were absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
I thought so anyway.
Thanks.
So Trank, solve a problem for me. We were talking about citrus greening and how to report it if you think you have it. Would that go to our UC Ag Extension agent? And how
Yeah,
would
I
people get to
think
it?
that and the, yeah, well, definitely they would be able to report it to the right places. So yeah, the ag agent at your cooperative extension, is a great place. We have.
Yeah, they want to probably make sure they identified it.
Mhm.
Because you can get a similar little wavy pattern. I've seen something similar on new trees just coming straight out of the greenhouse. And we called for winds and said, what's with these trees? They're new and they've got this weird, scary looking mottled pattern on them. And what it was is their oil spray. They use a lot of horticultural oil inside the greenhouse. And if you do it when it's a little too warm, you can get that little mottling on the tree. And so it grew out of it, but it can kind of throw you if it was a brand new tree, or you yourself have just treated it with a horticultural oil and it was kind of warm and you get a little bit of a burning pattern that can make that
like
random looking thing.
model. Yeah. Huh, interesting. It's great to hear that. We have some good questions, don't we, Delise?
We do. Let's launch into them. Okay, so Loretta, Danny Joe wants to know, how can you find out what rootstock your plant is when you buy it? And does that even matter? Do you need to know that?
Not so much anymore. I don't see a whole lot of differing rootstocks, but if the advertising tag won't say, usually if they say it, it'll be on a little colored tag that's on the base of the tree. It might be yellow or blue, and you'll see some weird abbreviations like CIT. That means citrange. That's the C35, that semi-dwarfing 3-leaf trifoliate that I talked about. So they give you abbreviations. So you'd have to know how that particular propagator abbreviated their rootstock. The other thing you'll see is STD, and no, it's not some kind of disease, it's standard. So it's on a standard rootstock. You'll see SD, and that usually just means semi-dwarf. And again, it's usually that trifoliate citrange. The other thing you'll see on lemons, you might see lemons have some different rootstocks because they tend to have an incompatibility with that little trifoliate. And that's why they tend to not be so small, because they're on this Yuma ponderosa lemon or on a Cuban shaddock that has a really weird looking bitter fruit that isn't inedible.
But does it really make a difference from one to another?
No, it doesn't. Just note that some folks, they come in all the time, they want dwarfing rootstock. There used to be a tag on Four Winds trees that said true dwarf. And I asked them, what does this mean? Is it any different than the rootstock that I know of? And they were just tags. Honestly, they were tags they were just trying to get rid of from back in the days where they used a smaller flying dragon rootstock that tends to be a little smaller. So, but still, the thing that's going to keep your tree dwarfed is a pot or your pruning habits to keep it smaller, and the nature of the fruit itself. Right. Those that are naturally smaller, the mandarins, the Meyer lemons, the key limes, they're naturally smaller, kumquats. But it doesn't really matter. The rootstock was chosen to be compatible with that fruit, and your just main concern is don't let it take over the tree and keep your tree pruned the way you want it. It's chosen the best it can for our area and for the growth.
Okay, we got more good ones for you. Delise?
Mike has a tree that's dropping lemons 4 to 5 a day. Is this a water situation? What are the main reasons that can happen?
And so I want to make sure it's a lemon. So my first question would be, because that symptom is like a natural way that bear's limes, that's a natural feature of a bear's lime. And like I say, a lot of people don't realize that limes turn yellow and they think they have a lemon, or they think they have something wrong because they don't think their lime should be turning yellow. But bears tends to drop all its fruit at once. The other thing I would ask, if it's a young tree and dropping its fruit, is it dropping mature fruit or immature little fruit? Because when citrus overset, they get a lot of blossoms, they tend to set too much fruit, and they drop a lot of it because they just set too many fruits. If it's a small tree especially, you might have to even go pluck some of the fruits off, because it can actually go the wrong way for you if you let a newly planted tree that has fruit on it grow that fruit, because your tree may go into shock for like 2 years after that, because it's put all its energy into ripening those lemons and not enough into growing the roots that it needed to grow. So the question is, if I don't know if we can have an interaction with Mike, but are they big lemons? Because it could be their time, and it isn't going to hang on the tree like other lemons can hang on the tree until the skin gets all puffy and brown.
Well,
Meyers hang on forever.
Mike, could you unmute and speak
Yes.
with us? Mike, I know you're there because I see you in the list.
Maybe.
Mike's still back.
Okay, well,
Well, if you can pop on and unmute yourself, we will get some
So
clear.
that's my answer. If they're little, it could be an overset. It's just a natural correction. If they're bigger, it could be the end of the hang time for that variety of lemon. Or it could be the bear's lime that turn yellow and they tend to drop them all at once. I'm still picking them up off the ground down there because they just preserve better out there than on my counter for whatever reason. I can go pick a lime off the dirt that's been there a month and it's still fresh. It isn't moldy. They mold when they get in my kitchen, but on the ground they're fine. So you can still use them. Then the other thing, if it's mature lemons, that's like a Eureka lemon that should hang and they're dropping, that's kind of a weird thing. I'd look for signs. Are they getting cut off with stem on them? Is it some kind of a cutting bee or a cutting bug of some sort that's cutting them off? Are they just the ones at the bottom that are dropping? Because that could be a squirrel reaching up there or a gopher eating stem. It doesn't want the fruit, it wants the stems, and maybe it looks like fruit is falling.
All
There's
right,
a lot
Loretta,
of things I'd ask.
you
So
know
next
too
question.
much. You just know too much. So it's bad. Okay. Candace would like to know if you've ever propagated from a stem successfully, and how long would it be until that fruited?
I have not. I work with a really knowledgeable plantsman at the nursery, Lance Reinert, and he says, oh, citrus are easy to grow from cutting. I think he uses bottom heat. So he uses a little heating pad and does it warm. He thinks it's easy. I've never done it. I started to one time and then I had to throw them out. It's a long story. If you want to hang out the end, I will tell you about it. But unbeknownst to me, I got into trouble with the USDA. So I had to pitch them. But they were green. They were acting like they had the juice in the stem was throwing off little blossoms and leaves. They weren't rooted yet though. So I think with warmth, they can be. And I know I've seen Meyer lemons grown from cutting for sale. There was no graft and they were a little more branchy right from the bottom, more like a lemon bush. And so I've seen that every now and then. I see Meyer lemons that are grown from cutting for sale. So it's possible, yeah. A little
Okay.
warmth maybe.
Jan would like to know if you need 2 different plants to pollinate.
No, self-pollinating. In fact, there's some reasons why you may not want another pollinator, and that's in the case of a lot of the seedless mandarins. Tango mandarin is popular. It's the little cutie, what the cutie brand of mandarin. It grows well for us. But if there's another tree nearby, and I don't know that it necessarily has to be a mandarin, but in the commercial orchards, the ones on the outside have more seeds and the ones on the inside are seedless. So in some cases, the pollination will give you seeds when it shouldn't. But no, you don't need two trees for pollinate. They're self-pollinating and they do pretty well. They tend to overset if the tree's healthy.
Okay, great. So we have two questions. We have Julie and Jennifer. Julie wants to know about transplanting a mandarin from a large patio pot into a yard. And Jennifer wants to know about container growing in general. How can you, let's talk about containers.
Okay, so I'll talk about the transplant first. That's great to get it in the ground. It'll do well. What you may see, especially if it's kind of root bound in the pot it's in. So again, you plant it just like you got this big tree from a nursery, but it came from a pot, right? So you're going to gently pry it out. You're going to plant it not too deep in as much native soil as possible. Little bit of amendment if your soil is really bad, if you have really heavy clay or something. But what you're going to be dealing with again, though, is maybe possibly a big root mass in the middle where the old pot used to be. So make sure you have your tank or your drips to water. Put water in that root mass because it's going to take a few months before the roots can travel out into the soil. But it should do much better in the ground, especially if it's been faltering in the pot. Because a lot of citrus do, if they don't get the right amount of nutrient, the heavy nutrient that they need is amplified in a pot and they get root bound up. So the other thing that can happen when you transplant it, it may be in a bit of a shock. It should recover, but I've had a root bound tree that I transplanted and it took 2 years. It just sat there. And then it started growing and fruiting. So it did recover, but it took 2 years. Don't go and try to massage a root ball. The one thing you can do to kind of help with that situation, if you have a root bound tree or you transplant it from a pot had been in a long time, just make some 2 or 3 vertical slits with a sharp knife. Cut in about 1/4 to 1/2 inch on that root mass, a few cuts. And that will kind of stimulate some new root growth from those cuts. And that might help you get rooted in a little quicker. But don't do the massaging and spreading out the roots. You're just going to shock the tree even more. And then container growing in general, again, they make great container fruiting trees. I would suggest stay with some of the smaller ones, the Meyer Lemons, Mandarin oranges, kumquats. The smaller sweet oranges like the Caracara navel is just slower and smaller growing than a Washington navel that wants to be really big right away. So look at those guidelines, and you'll also see size guidelines typically on the tag of the tree when you buy it. So look at the final heights that the average final heights that they print on there, and think about going something smaller. It's going to just be a little better suited to the pot, or you won't have to fight it as hard to keep it small. Let's put it that way, because you can still grow a big navel orange in a pot. They sell them in big wooden crates, fully grown, and the crates are 3x3 or 2x2. But again, you probably want to be able to move it around your patio. So maybe get wheels for it. Put it in really well draining mix, that 50-50 blend of cactus blend and potting soil, or even all cactus blend. And don't think that, it just seems like it's so dry. You will be watering it in the summer 3 times a week, and you will be giving it more nutrient than normal, but the roots will just do better in the grittier mix.
Okay, Loretta, we're going to go to the lightning round because we're running out of time.
Okay.
So speaking of soil, somebody wants to know where to find citrus/cactus soil. That's the same thing.
Typically at garden centers and nurseries. So if you go to a big box store garden center, I've seen cactus mix there. All the nurseries that I have ever been have sold, it'll say cactus, citrus, succulents on it. And succulents are so popular that just almost everybody has a mix that's already blended for succulents and citrus. And it's a weird thing to be associated with succulents and cactus, citrus, but that's what its roots like.
Okay. Do deer eat the foliage?
Yes, not if there's a rose bush nearby, they'll go for that first. It's not their favorite because there is a tendency there. I would say the younger trees are more likely, and it's not a whole lot. It's just a little nibble. I just don't think they like it, but gophers like it more. And it is a possibility that deer will go for it. So I would protect it till it gets a little bigger.
All right. Candace has always a bit of yellow on the leaves, but lots of fruit. What do you think the problem is? An impossible question.
Yeah, citrus, like I say, the yellow in the winter, it takes you kind of a while to pull them out of that in the spring when everything warms up and you feed them. I have some trees that are a little yellow and they bear like crazy. Because of that, I tend not to worry about it. As long as I know they get a good dose in the spring of a good citrus fertilizer, or even just a general purpose thing. And then I watch for any other signs of mine are all in the, except for that little key lime, mine are all in the soil. And it was a depleted soil when we moved in, but we have a lot of pig waste and stuff like that they get. So I wouldn't worry about it unless
And
it seems
you have to
endemic.
feed a little. You have to feed a little more when they're in a container, correct?
Yes, a lot more, because the soil is really well draining and it just tends to just go through it quicker. Liquid fertilizers work kind of well when you have them in pots for fish emulsions and things like that, but then those you use more often as well. And you can even pour those liquid ones on the leaves as well and see if you get a little bit of a foliar feed effect. They will absorb some nutrient from the leaf too that might help green up a little faster.
Great. We have Melissa who has a small lot and wants to know how far apart to plant.
Well, some of those trees, you can keep them to 6 to 8 foot wide. You just may have to prune. I'd say 8 foot apart. But if you're going to do like a Meyer Lemon and a Bear's Lime, you could put them about 6 feet apart. And just look at your sun, the way your sun flows on your property, so you don't put the big one shading out the little one. If you're only going to do a few citrus trees, because they're evergreen and they make their own shade, just keep that in mind where you plant them. But you can prune them to plant them 6 to 8 feet apart. Mine are 15, but.
All right. Should you pluck the flowers off the young trees to promote more energy going to the roots rather than fruit?
Yeah, what I tell customers is let them bloom because they smell so good, and then pinch it off after it's done blooming because it'll set a fruit. The Meyers are really prolific like that, and they come from the growers with a lot of blooms and fruit on them sometimes. And it's just this tiny little Charlie Brown tree, very small, but it has a lot of fruit. So yes, it's hard to do, but it kind of makes up for that in the long run, because like I say, customers come in all the time. It fruited the first year really well, and it hasn't done anything for 2 years but sat there. And it's because it overdid it. It put all its energy into that fruit and didn't make roots. So pluck it off.
How many years?
Enjoy the fragrance before you pluck it off.
How many years would you do that?
Just the first year, and then watch it the second year. If you see that it puts structure, it's put it out new branches and new growth, then it can then let it set some fruit, a few fruit, maybe not a whole ton, but a few. So keep it kind of proportional to the size of the tree, if that makes any sense. It's not a given, but the bigger the tree, the more fruit you can just then you stop caring and you let it overload, because you can't eat all those fruits anyway.
All righty, we're going to do 2 more questions. When's the best time to plant in the yard? Time of year.
Any time is really fine. Like I say, in cold weather, it's not going to do much. So don't expect it to start taking off and growing, because the rootstock, it's almost like it's bare root, even though we don't say citrus are bare root because the tops are green. The rootstock tends to be semi-dormant. So what I would avoid though, really avoid the heat waves. So look at your 2-week projection of the weather and avoid the heat waves. Because that'll just take moisture out of the tree that it needs to kind of help it keep itself hydrated and dug into the soil.
I think I see the most plants in the spring available in the nurseries. Do you see that too, or am I?
The citrus come year round. They come year round. Everybody tends to send out a lot of stuff in the spring because that's when you see the bare root fruit trees, all the stone fruits that you see. The nurseries and the garden centers are just full of them. But the citrus come year round. So you can still, and unfortunately with COVID, like I mentioned before, I've seen big drops in the number of varieties that they're propagating. They're propagating the standard ones, the top sellers, or they're better growers, and keeping some of the rarer ones. Just, I don't know if it's a labor shortage, if it's housing in the greenhouse, what all it's related to, but we've had customers, and we used to do special orders that we can't guarantee anymore because people were waiting months and months and still no promise of when it was going to come in. So if you peruse and you see a tree that's a variety that's kind of different or one you were looking for, you may not want to pass it up. It's been tough to get varieties. We get a lot of trees in, but there are a lot of the same varieties.
Okay, I am going to stop there so that we can get to the last few slides. So thank you. If you didn't get your question answered, we're about to look at a website where you can. Loretta, you want to go ahead and go to the next slide?
Okay, so this is the evaluation chat.
Here, I'll take care of this slide.
Oh, the Ask a Master Gardener hotline stump one?
Yeah, that's where those of you who didn't get your question answered today, please feel free to click on this link. We're going to send you the presentation. We're going to send you the recording of Loretta talking, which is awesome. And you can go to the UC Master Gardener hotline and send your question, and someone will get back to you on that. So can you go back a slide, please? All right, just so that you know, there is, we're going to be sending in that email that's going to have the resources, an evaluation survey that helps us understand how we're doing and make continual improvements and help Loretta know how wonderful she's doing. So that's going to come to you in an email shortly, within the next few days. And then you're going to get an email from the California Master Gardeners. That's a statewide program. And they send a survey asking if you implemented the information that you used, that you heard today. And the benefit of that is they use that data to get funding. And we absolutely need the funding. This is an all volunteer program. So please answer that email when it lands in your inbox. And we have some other classes coming up at the end of the month. We're going to have a really fun class. It's a do-it-yourself succulent arrangement class. So you'll make your own little mixed succulent arrangement in a pot. All the materials are going to be available. It's online right now. If you want to register, there's going to be a limit. It's an in-person workshop. So I recommend anybody who's feeling crafty, that is a wonderful thing to do. Once you've made one, you can make dozens. It's wonderful. Then for August, we're working on summer pruning and a native seed collecting and sharing class. And then we have more classes coming later in the fall and the summer. So keep in touch, because you join this meeting, you will be getting, you'll be added to our mailing list if you're not already on it. If you don't want to be on the mailing list, you can always opt out. Next, go 2 slides, please. Next one. And then Loretta has created a wonderful appendix for us. Want to talk about that? Because you're going to get this deck.
Yeah, so the person who asked about the potted citrus care, there's a really good article put out by our organization, the Monterey Bay Master Gardeners. That's that first link for potted citrus. And for those of you who want to try to get some variety that you're not seeing in the nursery, you can order, mail order. Four Winds is, they send out really healthy trees. They're going to be very young. They sell two sizes, but basically they have a lot of varieties, and you'll go to the website and see they're not available. But what you can do is you can put your email address for that variety, and when they are available, you'll get an email and you can go straight to that website and order. I've done that a lot for trees I was waiting for, because they seem to become available there before they get to the commercial nurseries. That's what I noticed. So, and they have a lot of good growing information and just information on the varieties themselves. Then the next link, there's, of course, there's the University of California has a plethora of growing information, everything from soup to nuts, integrated pest management, citrus. So I added the integrated pest management for citrus, which would be your least, your methods for least harmful control of insect pests on your citrus. Like I said, for most of the citrus stuff, once you control the ants and stuff, everything else, I've never seen something that really devastates a tree. You'll get some leaf cutter bees kind of activity going on, or grasshoppers or things, but it's those rodents you have to watch, the gophers, the ground squirrels, and the ants. They're the worst that I've seen for damage to your trees. And then that was a good article, that local nursery, it's a Monterey Bay nursery, that had some good information on there that I saw, so I just included that link. But this is something we can keep building.
As master gardeners, we're not really allowed to identify specific vendors. So Four Winds is a good vendor that Loretta recommends, but there are others. So,
and a lot of them, just note that there are a lot of other places you can get trees from, but like one is Fast Growing Trees. They get their trees from Four Winds. So a lot of the citrus trees you buy online will come from our local propagator, or there's a few others in California. But what I noticed is with that disease, that greening disease, a lot of the citrus nurseries just went under because they didn't have the means to put up all the greenhouses they need to have, or buy the greenhouses they need to have to grow everything under glass. So there's not as many citrus propagators as there used to be in California.
Good to know. All right, everybody, thank you. We've got a support group for gopher killers here, starting up. This is excellent. We do teach an integrated vertebrate pest management class every year. Trink and I teach that. Loretta could probably teach that in her sleep, and look for that. You will see our classes coming out. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Thank you, Loretta. Thank you, Trink.
Thank you.
And
Thanks,
we will
Elise. Thanks,
see
Trink.
you later.
Thank you.
Take care.